a 4-year lie, and an empire built entirely on deceit. My husband and co-founder, Vincent, was supposed to be managing a deep-sea project in Alaska. I held our architectural firm together in Boston, alone. Then, at the airport lounge, our lead investor walked up to me. "How is Vincent doing? I just saw him in Seaport last week, with a pregnant woman." My blood ran cold. He hadn't been in Alaska. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I took his life apart brick by brick. By the time he realized it, he had absolutely nothing left. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine idling in the freezing Boston winter. Snow flurries hit the windshield, melting instantly against the glass. Ethan's words echoed in the small enclosed space of my car. Vincent, Seaport, a pregnant woman, 4 years, in movies. When a woman finds out her husband has been living a double life, she screams. She hits the steering wheel. She breaks down in agonizing sobs. I didn't do any of that. My eyes were completely dry. My breathing was slow, steady. It felt strange, almost terrifying, how calm I was. But there is a biological reason for this. When a person faces a betrayal so massive that it exceeds the psychological limit of endurance, when you realize the last 4 years of waiting, of sacrificing, were just an illusion. The brain bypasses the normal fight or flight response. The amygdala, the emotional center, simply overloads and shuts down. It hands total control over to the prefrontal cortex, the center of logic, analysis, and computation. It is a brutal survival mechanism. My brain had to temporarily kill off the vulnerable, an emotional wife to protect my core identity from a total collapse. I wasn't numb, I was computing. I am an architect. For a decade, my job has been to look at structures, to find the load-bearing walls, to spot the foundational cracks, to understand how things are built and how they fall apart. Vincent and I built our firm together. We built our marriage together. Now, I turned that same analytical gaze onto our life. The blueprint of his lies was suddenly unfurled in front of me, and the structural flaws were glaringly obvious. I closed my eyes and traced the timeline. 4 years ago, Vincent pitched the Alaska deep-sea drilling project, a massive contract for our firm. He had to be on site to oversee the structural integrations. The rig was isolated, the signal was notoriously bad. How many times had our video calls frozen? How many times had the screen pixelated, the audio dropping out just as he was answering a simple question? The background was always a tight shot of a sterile cabin wall. The wind howling outside. It was a perfect, impenetrable setup. I had trusted my co-founder. I had trusted my husband. I reached into the passenger seat and pulled out my laptop. I rested it on the steering wheel. The glow of the screen lit up the dark, cold car. If Vincent wasn't in Alaska, he was here, in Boston, living in the Seaport district. Maintaining 2 lives in the same city requires immense logistical precision. But more importantly, it requires money, a lot of money. We had joint accounts, but as co-founders, our personal and corporate finances were deeply intertwined. I logged into our primary banking portal. The cursor blinked. I navigated to his corporate expense reports. Over the past 4 years, Vincent had claimed substantial travel and living stipends for the Alaska deployment, housing allowances, hazard pay, equipment logistics. I cross-referenced the dates. The withdrawals were consistent, heavily structured. 8,000 here, 12,000 there, always labeled under remote infrastructure costs. I pulled up the IP access logs for our company servers. If he was working from a rig in the Bering Sea, his logins should reflect satellite routing. I scrolled through months of data. The IP addresses were masked through a basic VPN, but the latency didn't match a remote satellite connection. The ping rate was less than 20 milliseconds. He was logging into our secure servers from a broadband connection right here on the East Coast. The pieces were snapping together with cold, mechanical precision. The erratic hours, the sudden disconnections. The times he claimed the harsh weather grounded all flights back to Boston for the holidays. He hadn't been braving blizzards in Alaska. He had been a few miles away, likely looking at the same winter sky as me. The heater in the car finally began to push warm air, but the ice inside my chest was solidifying. He had weaponized my trust. He had used my dedication to our firm to fund his deception. He thought because I was focused on our blueprints, I wouldn't notice the rot in our own foundation. I closed the laptop. The screen went black. I didn't reach for my phone to call him. I didn't demand an explanation. Explanations are for misunderstandings. This was a calculated demolition. I put the car in gear and pulled out into the icy streets. It was time to survey the real damage, and then it was time to tear his structure down to the ground. I drove straight to the Seaport District. It was late, but the area was alive with the harsh glare of streetlights reflecting off the icy harbor. The high-rises here were fortresses of glass and steel, designed to keep the world out. I knew Vincent's tastes. He liked exclusivity. He liked control. Finding exactly which building he was in wouldn't be easy, but I had Ethan's offhand comment and my own architectural knowledge. I narrowed it down to 3 luxury developments with the specific structural footprint and discrete entry points Vincent would favor. I parked across the street from the first one, the Grand Seaport, a monolith of modern design. And the security here wasn't just a guy at a desk. It was biometric access, subterranean private parking, a completely closed loop. Breaking in was impossible. But I wasn't going to break in. I was going to walk in. I sat in the car for a moment, letting the heater run, gathering my thoughts. When you design a building, you don't just think about the walls and the doors, you think about the people who move through them. The human element is always the weakest point in any system. I didn't need to bypass the security algorithms, I just needed to bypass the guy running them. I reached into the back seat and grabbed a sleek black gift box I had picked up from a specialty boutique on Newberry Street years ago and never opened. Inside was a bottle of 1996 Chateau Margaux. Vincent had received it as a gift from a client. He took one look at it and sneered, calling it overrated and too earthy for his refined palate. He left it gathering dust in the back of my closet. Tonight, that rejected bottle was going to be my key. I walked into the brightly lit lobby. It was pristine, smelling faintly of expensive cedarwood. Behind the sweeping marble desk sat the night manager. He looked up from his monitor, his expression a polite mask of professional detachment. "Good evening, ma'am. Can I help you?" "I certainly hope so," I said, putting on my most polished, slightly frazzled executive smile. "I'm so sorry to bother you this late. I'm Clara. I work with Vincent. Vincent Sterling? We're partners at the firm." I watched his eyes. A flicker of recognition. Vincent lived here. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Is he expecting you?" The manager asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Oh no, it's a surprise," I laughed softly, placing the heavy black box on the marble counter. "It's actually a thank you gift. We just closed a massive deal, and I know he's been working crazy hours lately. I wanted to drop this off for him and his wife. They're celebrating, and I completely forgot to bring it by the office." I let the lie hang in the air, smooth and practiced. The manager glanced at the box, then back at me. He looked uncomfortable. "I see. Well, ma'am, it's our policy not to accept unannounced deliveries directly to the penthouse suites, especially this late. I can leave it for him at the desk, and he can collect it in the morning." "Penthouse," I filed the word away. "I completely understand," I said, leaning in just a fraction, lowering my voice conspiratorially. "The thing is, why, it's a 1996 Margaux. It really needs to be stored properly, and honestly, I'm terrified to leave it out. Vincent is particular about his wine." I gave him a knowing look, the kind of look one professional gives another when dealing with a difficult boss. The manager sighed, a small crack in his professional armor. "He is very particular, yes." "Look, I don't want to make your night difficult," I said, my voice sympathetic. "How about this? I know he usually parks in the VIP subterranean level. If you could just let me slip this into the backseat of his car. The Mercedes, right? I have the spare key fob from the office. I'll just put it in the car and he'll find it when he leaves tomorrow. No one has to go up to the penthouse." I held up a generic black key fob I used for my own car, hoping the dim lighting and his fatigue would work in my favor. He hesitated. It was a breach of protocol, but it solved his immediate problem of dealing with an expensive, unannounced delivery. And it kept the surprise intact. He looked at the box again. The name on the label commanded respect. All right, he finally relented, pulling a master key card from his desk. But I have to escort you down. Company policy. Of course. Thank you so much. You're a lifesaver. We rode the silent, mirrored elevator down to the subterranean garage. It was a cavernous space, filled with high-end vehicles sleeping under the fluorescent lights. The manager led me to a secluded, gated section at the far end. There it was, Vincent's sleek black Mercedes. The car he claimed he left parked at the airport long-term lot in Boston while he was in Alaska. The car he said was gathering snow. It was impeccably clean, polished to a high shine. Here we are, the manager said, standing back. I walked up to the car, my heart hammering a steady, cold rhythm against my ribs. I pressed the button on my generic fob. Nothing happened, of course. I feigned a look of frustration, clicking it again. Oh, for heaven's sake, the battery must be dead. Typical. I let out a sharp sigh. I'm so sorry to have dragged you down here for nothing. It happens, the manager said, looking relieved that he didn't have to witness me actually open the car. We can just leave it with security upstairs, as I suggested. No, you were right. It's too risky. I'll just bring it back to the office tomorrow. I picked up the box, turning to him with an apologetic smile. Thank you again for your help. Really. I appreciate it. Not a problem, ma'am. As we walked back to the elevator, I casually glanced back at the car. The license plate, the pristine condition. I had what I needed. I had confirmed his location, penthouse suite. The car was here, the lie was solidifying into undeniable physical reality. But then, as the elevator doors were closing, the manager, perhaps feeling a pang of sympathy for my wasted trip, offered one final, devastating piece of information. Just so you know, ma'am, Mr. Sterling rarely uses that car on weekdays anyway. He usually takes a private car service in the mornings. Says he doesn't like driving in the seaport traffic. He's usually gone by 7:30 a.m. 7:30 a.m. A precise time, a daily routine. Thank you, I said softly as the doors sealed shut. I walked out of the grand seaport, and the icy wind off the harbor biting into my skin. The bottle of 1996 Margot felt heavy in my hands. A bottle he despised had just given me the keys to his kingdom. I knew where he slept. I knew what he drove. And now, I knew exactly when he left the safety of his fortress. A meaningless bottle of wine had handed me a fatal flaw in his schedule. He thought he could control everything with money and lies. But he forgot that sometimes the arrogance you show the people you consider beneath you, the way you dismiss a gift, the way you treat a night manager, becomes the very blade that cuts you down. Tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m., I was going to see exactly what kind of life Vincent Sterling had built in the shadows. I didn't go to the office the next morning. Instead, I drove to a quiet diner on the edge of the city. Harper was already there, sitting in a back booth with a thick manila folder resting on the table. Harper was our firm's internal counsel. She was sharp, pragmatic, and fiercely loyal to the company we had built. But more importantly, she was loyal to the truth. I slid into the booth across from her. She looked exhausted, nursing a black coffee. Clara? I did what you asked. I ran the internal audit on Vincent's communications and his recent executive actions. What I found is, it's worse than we thought. I kept my face perfectly still. Show me. She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. First, let's talk about Alaska. She clicked on an audio file. It was a recording of a video call Vincent and I had 2 weeks ago. The screen was black, but the audio was crystal clear. Vincent's voice crackled through the speakers, apologizing for the terrible connection, the sound of a violent blizzard howling in the background. Now, listen to this. She opened another program, a visualizer with shifting green waveforms. She isolated the background noise of the blizzard. I ran the audio through a forensic analysis tool. That wind, that storm, it's a loop. It's a highly sophisticated AI deepfake overlay. He's been using a program to generate ambient environmental noise in real time. The wind pattern repeats exactly every 47 seconds. I stared at the green waves moving across the screen. 4 years. Every dropped call, every frozen frame, every time he said he couldn't hear me over the storm. It was software. He sat in a luxury penthouse in Boston, pressed a button, and generated an Alaskan blizzard. The sheer calculation of it made my stomach turn. But the fake audio isn't the reason I called you here. Harper closed the laptop and pulled the manila folder toward her. The real problem is what he's been doing while you thought he was snowed in. She opened the folder and pushed a stack of legal documents across the table. I looked down. The letterhead belonged to a corporate registration firm in Delaware. What is this? It's a shell company, registered 3 months ago under the name Apex Holdings. The sole listed beneficiary is a woman named Maya. My nails dug into my palms under the table. Maya, the pregnant woman in Seaport. I kept reading. The documents weren't just for a shell company, they were transfer deeds. Vincent is using his executive authority as co-founder to quietly siphon our firm's core assets. He's transferring the intellectual property rights of your top 10 architectural designs directly into Apex Holdings. My designs. The blueprints I had spent a decade perfecting. The eco towers, the waterfront complex, the patents on the modular frameworks. My entire life's work. If this goes through, Clara, you won't just lose your husband. You will lose the firm. You will lose the rights to your own creations. And because of the way our corporate debt is structured, you will be left holding millions in liabilities while he walks away with a clean, fully funded empire. I stared at the black ink on the white paper. The betrayal was so absolute, so vast, it transcended anger. It was no longer about a man cheating on his wife. This was a corporate execution. He was trying to erase me completely. When does the transfer finalize? Harper tapped a date highlighted in yellow at the bottom of the page. Friday, in exactly 3 days. Once the holding company countersigns, the IP legally shifts. Reversing it in court could take years, and he knows we don't have the capital for a protracted legal war. 3 days, 72 hours to save my legacy. Harper looked at me. Clara, what are we going to do? If he realizes we know, he won't realize a thing, I said calmly. I gathered the documents and slipped them back into the folder. Vincent thinks I'm blind. He thinks I am just the architect, buried in my blueprints, completely ignorant of the business mechanics. Let him keep thinking that. I looked at Harper. Prepare the asset freeze injunctions. Draft the emergency board resolutions. We are going to let him build his little house of cards all the way to the top. And then, we are going to burn it to the ground. I sat in the darkness of my home office, staring at the scattered documents on my drafting table. Outside, the Boston skyline glittered, cold and indifferent. Spread out before me wasn't a blueprint for a new high-rise. It was the blueprint of a sociopath. 4 years. I kept asking myself the same question. How do you do it? How do you look your wife in the eye through a camera lens, promise her the world, and then walk across a penthouse to kiss a pregnant woman? How does a person not simply crush under the immense, suffocating weight of that much deception? Vincent was a master of aesthetics. He always wore the right suit, said the right words, presented the perfect image of a dedicated, driven entrepreneur. He wasn't just a cheater stumbling through a messy affair. Why, he had orchestrated an immaculate, multi-million-dollar stage play. He used his intelligence not to build our company, but to engineer a flawless, parallel existence. I needed to understand the mechanics of his mind, not to forgive him, but to know exactly where to plant the explosives. People assume that monsters simply have no conscience, but the reality is far more clinical. As I looked at his forged expense reports and the deepfake audio files, the structure of his psychology became glaringly obvious. It is a phenomenon called compartmentalization. Vincent had built soundproof, airtight walls inside his own brain. He divided his reality into separate, isolated rooms. In one room, he was the dutiful husband and brilliant co-founder, enduring the brutal isolation of an Alaskan oil rig to secure our financial legacy. He played that role with such conviction that he actually believed his own sacrifice. And in the other room, He was the wealthy, charming patron, providing a luxurious nest in the Seaport district for a young, naive violinist. His survival depended on keeping those doors firmly shut. As long as the two rooms never intersected, his brain could avoid the crushing cognitive dissonance of being a terrible person. He convinced himself that as long as everyone was happy in their separate boxes, he wasn't doing anything evil. He manipulated my ambition, knowing I would bury myself in architectural plans and never question his absence. He manipulated Maya's innocence, giving her a fairy tale that didn't exist. It was a staggering display of arrogance, but it was also his greatest weakness. This wasn't the behavior of a strong, calculating mastermind. It was the ultimate cowardice. He was a man so pathologically terrified of facing his own failures, so desperate to avoid looking in the mirror, that he built a labyrinth to hide in. Every fake blizzard, every forged transfer, was a heavy support beam he had to manually hold up, day after exhausting day. He thinks his walls are bulletproof. He thinks his mask is his true face. But I am an architect. I know exactly what happens to a structure built on a fractured foundation. When I force those two rooms to collide, when the doors are finally ripped off their hinges, he isn't going to just lose his assets. He's going to lose his mind. I waited outside the Boston Conservatory. The winter air was biting, freezing my breath as I watched the heavy glass doors. Finally, she walked out. Maya. She carried a violin case strapped to her back. Her heavy wool coat couldn't hide the gentle curve of her stomach. She looked young, radiant, completely unaware of the fragile ice she was standing on. The anger I expected to feel didn't come. I looked at her and only saw another structural flaw in Vincent's design. She was a victim of the same architect. She crossed the street and went into a quiet, dimly lit tea shop. I gave her a moment to settle, then followed her inside. She was sitting by the window, blowing gently on a hot cup of chamomile tea. I walked over and pulled out the chair directly across from her. "Excuse me," she started, looking up in surprise, her hand instinctively pulling her scarf tighter. "Maya," I said quietly, taking a seat. "My name is Clara. I work with Vincent." Her face instantly softened. A warm smile spread across her lips. "Oh, you are one of Vincent's investors. He talks about his venture partners sometimes, but he never mentioned a Clara. It is so nice to meet you." Investors. He hadn't just lied to her about being single. He had completely erased my existence. He stripped away my role as his co-founder and reduced me to a faceless bank account. I placed a thick manila folder on the wooden table between us. "I am not an investor, Maya. I am his business partner. And I am his wife." The smile vanished from her face like a light being switched off. She stared at me, blinking rapidly. Then she let out a nervous, breathy laugh. "I'm sorry." "What?" "That's not a very funny joke. Vincent isn't married. We have been together for 3 years. 3 years. While I was managing the firm, balancing our corporate debt, and waiting for him to return from the freezing waters of Alaska, he was building a second home just a few miles away." I didn't argue with her. Arguments are driven by emotion. Evidence is driven by logic. I opened the folder. I slid a copy of our marriage certificate across the table. Next to it, the corporate registration for our architectural firm, displaying both our names side by side. Then, the financial logs transferring money from our joint accounts to pay the lease on the Seaport penthouse. Maya looked down at the papers. Her hand slowly moved from her scarf to rest protectively over her stomach. No, this is a mistake. These are forged. He's an independent consultant. He travels to Europe for weeks at a time to secure supply chains. He's in London right now. Europe, not Alaska. He customized the lie for each of us, calculating exactly what we would believe. I took my phone out of my pocket and set it on the table. "Listen to this," I said. I pressed play on the audio file Harper had isolated. The sound of a violent Alaskan blizzard filled the quiet space between us. Then came Vincent's voice. He was telling me he loved me, telling me the rig was too loud, telling me he missed our home. Maya's face turned completely ashen. She recognized his voice. She recognized the cadence of his lies. He uses an AI deepfake software to generate that background noise, I explained, my voice steady and cold. He plays it while sitting in his private office. Or maybe he plays it while sitting in the penthouse with you, claiming he is on a business call. I watched her world collapse in real time. It was the exact same collapse I experienced in my car just 2 days ago. But she didn't have the protective armor of a prefrontal cortex shutting out the pain to compute the data. She began to tremble uncontrollably. Tears spilled over her eyelashes and dropped onto the forged financial records. Why? Why are you showing me this? She whispered, her voice breaking, her shoulders shaking. Are you here to ruin my life? Vincent already did that, I said calmly. I am here to wake you up. I pushed the folder closer to her trembling hands. You are carrying his child. You think you are building a family with a successful, single businessman. You are actually living in a shell company, funded by stolen assets, with a man who does not exist. In 3 days, I am going to court to freeze every single one of his accounts. The penthouse, the money, the illusion. It will all be gone. She covered her mouth with both hands, in trying to stifle a heavy sob. I don't hate you, Maya, I said, standing up from the table. You are just collateral damage in his corporate game. But the game is over now. Keep the files. Hire a good lawyer. Protect yourself and protect that baby. Because when Vincent realizes he is cornered, when the walls finally close in on him, he will sacrifice you just as easily as he sacrificed me. I turned and walked out of the tea shop, leaving her sitting alone with the ruins of her life. The cold Boston wind hit my face, but I didn't feel it. There was only one piece of the structure left to demolish. I let myself into the penthouse using the digital code Harper had pulled from the building's server logs. The place was a monument to Vincent's ego. Sleek, minimalist, expensive. Walls of glass overlooking the harbor. I didn't turn on any lights. I just sat in a leather armchair in the corner of the vast living room, waiting in the dark. At exactly 8 o'clock, the lock clicked. The door opened and Vincent walked in, humming softly, a tailored overcoat draped over his arm. He tossed his keys onto a glass table. The sharp clatter echoed in the silent room. How was London, Vincent? He froze. He didn't drop his coat, but his entire body stiffened, a statue suddenly realizing it was standing on a fault line. Slowly, painfully, he turned toward my voice. In the dim light pouring in from the city outside, I watched his face cycle through a dozen different calculations in a fraction of a second. Confusion, panic, and then the inevitable attempt at control. Clara? What? What are you doing here? He asked, his voice tight but remarkably steady. How did you get in? And I tapped my fingers on the armrest. I prefer not to be asked questions I already know the answers to. I'm here because Maya told me she was expecting you back from Europe tonight. I wanted to welcome you home. The name hit him like a physical blow. The practiced facade, the polished veneer he had worn for 4 years, simply shattered. He staggered back a step, leaning against the wall for support. His chest began to heave. Clara. Let me explain. You have to let me explain. Explain what? I asked, my voice devoid of any warmth. Explain how you faked an Alaskan deep-sea project? Explain the deepfake audio software you used to simulate blizzards while sitting in this very room? Or maybe explain the shell company you set up to steal the patents I spent 10 years designing. He didn't try to deny it. He couldn't. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, burying his face in his hands. And then he started to cry. It wasn't a silent, dignified weeping. It was a loud, ugly, desperate sound. The sound of a man watching his empire burn. I didn't plan for any of this, he sobbed, looking up at me, his eyes wide and pleading. You have to believe me, Clara. I never wanted to hurt you. I watched him, feeling absolutely nothing. You said you met her 3 years ago. But you've been faking Alaska for 4. Where were you during that first year, Vincent? He flinched. He looked away, his jaw clenching. It was the one piece of the puzzle he hadn't anticipated me solving. I didn't go, he whispered, his voice trembling. The Alaska deal. It fell through at the last minute. The investors backed out. I lost the funding. I lost my entire bonus structure. I leaned forward. So you just turned around? I couldn't face you, he shouted, his voice cracking. You were always so perfect, Clara, so driven. You were building the firm, winning awards. I was supposed to be the one securing our future. I couldn't walk back into our house and tell you I had failed. I couldn't bear the look of disappointment I knew I'd see in your eyes. So you rented a cheap place in the suburbs. You faked the project to save your pride. Yes, he choked out. I thought I could just work independently, secure some private contracts, make the money back, and then pretend I was returning from the rig. It was supposed to be a temporary lie, just until I fixed it. But you didn't fix it. You just built a comfortable life inside the lie. I met Maya, and it was easy. With her, I wasn't the failed co-founder. I was just me. A successful consultant. I didn't have to compete with your genius. The lie just grew. It became a swamp, Clara. The harder I tried to get out, the deeper I sank. And then she got pregnant, and I needed the money to secure her future, to secure my escape. I panicked. I stood up. I walked over to him, looking down at the man I had promised to spend my life with. You didn't panic, Vincent. You calculated. You didn't lie to protect my feelings. You lied to protect your own fragile, pathetic ego. You couldn't handle failure, so you decided to steal my success instead. I'm sorry. He wept, reaching out to grab the hem of my coat. Please, Clara, I'll give it all back. I'll stop the IP transfer. Just give me another chance. I stepped back, pulling my coat from his grasp. There are no more chances, Vincent. You tore down our foundation 4 years ago. Now, you get to live in the rubble. I looked down at the man sitting on the hardwood floor. The man I had shared a bed with, built a company with. He realized his tears were useless. The pitiful act wasn't working. Slowly, the sobbing stopped. Vincent wiped his face, and when he looked up at me again, the despair in his eyes had been replaced by something else. Something calculating. Clara, you don't have all the facts. He pushed himself off the floor, leaning heavily against the glass coffee table. I didn't do the IP transfer out of greed. I did it because I had no choice. I crossed my arms. You always have a choice, Vincent. Not this time. He took a shaky breath, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. It's the baby, Clara. Maya's baby. I felt a tiny, involuntary tightening in my chest, but I kept my face blank. What about the baby? We got the ultrasound results back 2 weeks ago. He swallowed hard, staring at the floor. The baby has a severe congenital heart defect, hypoplastic left heart syndrome. It needs multiple, highly specialized open heart surgeries the absolute second it is born. The insurance won't cover the experimental treatments we need. It's going to cost millions. Millions, Clara. Cash up front. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the faint, muffled hum of the Boston traffic far below. I couldn't just watch my child die, he suddenly yelled, his voice echoing off the glass walls. I didn't have that kind of liquid capital. My equity is tied up in our firm. If I tried to cash out, you would have known. If I asked you for the money, and I would have to confess everything. So I set up Apex Holdings. I expedited the IP transfers so I could secure a massive line of credit against your patents. I was going to use the money to save the baby's life. He took a step toward me, holding out his hands like a beggar. Clara, I am a liar. I am a coward. I will walk away from the firm. I will sign whatever divorce papers you want. But if you freeze those assets tomorrow, if you file that injunction and block the IP transfer, my baby will die. He was weaponizing the ultimate moral dilemma. He was placing a ticking bomb in my hands and telling me that if I defended my own life's work, the blood of an innocent infant would be on my hands. Please, he begged, tears streaming down his face again. You are angry at me. Punish me. But don't punish an innocent child. Don't be a murderer. Said Clara. A cold, sharp current ran straight through my veins. For 6 years, I had dreamed of having a child. We had tried, we had failed, and he had always told me to be patient. to wait until the firm was stable. And now, this man, who had stolen my time and my trust, was looking me in the eye and using an unborn life as a bargaining chip to walk away with my company. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I took one step closer to him, my words slicing through the air like a scalpel. You are not just a liar, Vincent. You are a sociopath. Clara, please. Do not interrupt me, I snapped. You just stood there and tried to make me responsible for the life of the child you conceived in secret. You tried to turn my intellectual property, my life's work, into a hostage ransom for a sick baby. I have no other way to pay for the surgeries. You could sell your shares, I fired back. You could liquidate your own personal portfolios. You could sell this penthouse, but you didn't do that, did you? Because if you sold your own assets, you would be broke. You wanted to save your child, but you wanted me to foot the bill. You wanted to emerge as the heroic father, fully funded by the company you stole from your wife. Vincent opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just stared at me, his chest heaving. You don't get to use a sick baby as a human shield to protect your corporate theft. I stepped right up to him, looking deep into his terrified eyes. The truth is, Vincent, you don't really love Maya. You don't even love that unborn child. The only person you have ever loved in your entire pathetic life is yourself. And you are willing to use a baby's failing heart to manipulate my conscience, just to keep your bank accounts full. He backed away from me, his face pale, completely stripped of every defense mechanism he had ever built. The injunction gets filed tomorrow morning at 9, I said, turning my back on him. I am taking back my company. As for how you pay for your child's medical bills, I suggest you start packing your bags. This penthouse should fetch a good price on the market. I walked toward the door. Clara, he screamed behind me, a raw primal sound of total defeat. Clara, you can't do this. I opened the heavy oak door, stepping out into the brightly lit hallway. Watch me. I let the door click shut behind me, sealing him inside the ruins of his own making. I didn't sleep a single minute that night. I sat by the window in my own home, watching the Boston city lights blink out one by one. Vincent thought his final manipulation would paralyze me. He thought the guilt of an unborn child would be the mortar that held his crumbling foundation together. But he fundamentally misunderstood how I operate. When an architect finds a fatal flaw in a load-bearing wall, you don't patch it with tape, and you certainly don't look away. You tear it down before it collapses on everyone inside. At 8 in the morning, the air was freezing. Harper was waiting for me on the stone steps of the Suffolk County Courthouse. She had a thick leather briefcase tucked under her arm. We have the emergency hearing in 20 minutes, she said. Are you ready for this? I took a slow breath. Tear it down, Harper. The courtroom was empty except for the judge, a clerk, and the two of us. White Harper presented the evidence with lethal efficiency. The deepfake audio analysis, the offshore shell company routing, the unauthorized IP transfer documents, Vincent's forged expense reports detailing phantom Alaskan deployments. It took the judge exactly 14 minutes to review the files. He looked up, his expression grim. Injunction granted, he said, his gavel hitting the wood. It was 12 hours before Vincent's deadline to steal my patents. 12 hours. We didn't just stop the transfer. We severed his access to the firm's financial arteries. The asset freeze was absolute. Every joint account, every corporate credit card, the hidden equity lines, locked. He couldn't move a single cent. But we weren't finished. The legal strike was just the roof. Now we had to take out the pillars. At 2 in the afternoon, Harper and I convened an emergency meeting with the board of directors. Ethan, the investor from the airport, was sitting at the table, looking bewildered. Vincent walked into the boardroom 10 minutes late. He was wearing his tailored suit, holding his phone, looking every bit the untouchable visionary. He stopped dead when he saw me sitting quietly at the head of the table. Clara, what is the meaning of this? He demanded. Why was my access card declined at the lobby? I didn't say a word. I just leaned back in my chair. Harper slid a printed copy of the court injunction across the mahogany table. Vincent, your employment is terminated, effective immediately. the chairman of the board spoke, his voice laced with absolute disgust. Security is waiting outside to escort you off the premises. We are launching a full internal audit, and the firm will be pursuing criminal charges for corporate fraud and embezzlement. Vincent's face drained of all color. He looked around the room, making eye contact with Ethan, the partners, the people who had funded him for a decade. None of them looked away. None of them offered a shred of sympathy. He was completely exposed. The brilliant businessman was gone, leaving only a pathetic, desperate thief. He opened his mouth to speak, but there was nothing left to say. He turned and walked out of the glass doors, flanked by 2 armed guards. I watched him go, feeling the suffocating pressure of the last 4 years finally lift from my chest. But a structure doesn't just fall at the office, it collapses at home too. Later that evening, my phone vibrated. It was a text from an unknown number. It was Maya. I packed my things. I'm going back to my parents' house in Vermont. I left the penthouse keys on the counter. Thank you, Clara. Vincent returned to the Seaport District that night, an absolute ghost. He had no company. He had no stolen patents. He had no hidden wealth to bargain with. And when he unlocked the door to his pristine penthouse, he found it completely empty. The violin case was gone. The warmth was gone. Maya had taken the only innocent thing in his life and walked out the door forever. In exactly 12 hours, I had dismantled a lie that took him 4 years to build. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a single plate. I didn't shed a single tear. I just used the very logic he thought I was too blind to see. And I dismantled his reality down to the absolute last brick. The silence in my house used to feel like a punishment, and it used to be a reminder of the husband I was waiting for. Now, the silence was beautiful. It was the sound of a cleared lot, the sound of a clean slate. The debris was gone, and for the first time in 4 years, the ground beneath my feet was finally solid. At 11 p.m., my phone buzzed. A single text message from Vincent. I'm sorry, Clara. I can't live in the ruins. I'm going to the lighthouse, the abandoned structure on the cliffs of Massachusetts Bay. We used to go there when we first started the firm, dreaming of what we would build. Now, a massive nor'easter was rolling in, bringing 0 visibility and freezing temperatures. I didn't hesitate. I dialed 911, gave them the location, and grabbed my keys. By the time I reached the coast, the storm was fully unleashed. The wind was a physical force, screaming off the Atlantic and hurling snow sideways. The police hadn't arrived yet. I parked at the base of the access road and fought my way up the icy path on foot. Through the blinding whiteout, I saw his car parked near the edge. And then, I saw him. Vincent was standing on the very edge of the cliff, his back to the raging ocean, just steps away from the crumbling stone wall of the lighthouse. He wasn't wearing a coat. Vincent! I screamed, my voice immediately swallowed by the wind. He slowly turned. In the flashes of lightning, his face was unrecognizable. The polished, arrogant CEO was gone. He looked completely hollowed out. You came, he yelled back, his voice raw. Why did you come? You won, Clara. You took everything. Step back from the edge, I shouted, fighting my way closer, with a freezing spray from the crashing waves hitting my face. The police are on their way. I have nothing left, he cried, swaying slightly in the violent gusts. The firm is gone. Maya is gone. The baby. I can't save it. I'm a failure. I'm a thief. I can't face them, Clara. I can't face any of it. He took a half step backward. Small rocks tumbled down the cliff face, disappearing into the black water raging 60 feet below. Vincent, don't do this, I screamed, lunging forward, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Do you want me to live? He yelled over the storm, tears mixing with the freezing rain on his face. After everything I did, do you actually want me to live? I stopped. I stood there, 10 feet away from the man who had systematically destroyed my life. Did I want him to live? The anger inside me was a towering inferno. He deserved prison. He deserved to lose his empire. But this? Jumping off a cliff to escape the consequences of his own actions. This was just one final, ultimate act of cowardice. I don't love you anymore, I screamed, the truth ripping out of my throat, cutting through the howling wind. You lied to me for 4 years. You tried to steal my life's work. You used a sick child to manipulate me. He flinched, leaning further back toward the abyss. But you don't get to run away, I yelled, taking another step forward. You don't get to take the easy way out and leave a mess for everyone else to clean up. You don't get to make me watch you die, so I have to live with that image for the rest of my life. He stared at me, trembling violently, the cold and the reality finally sinking in. You want to be a man, Vincent, I screamed, holding out my hand. Then step away from that ledge. Face the board, face the judge, face Maya. Pay the price for what you built. The wind roared, a deafening crescendo. Vincent looked down at the churning black water, then back up at me. For a long, agonizing second, he teetered on the brink. Then, slowly, he fell to his knees on the icy rock, sobbing into his hands. I didn't run to hold him. I didn't offer comfort. I just stood there in the storm, watching the police sirens finally cut through the whiteout in the distance. I had saved his life, not because he deserved it, but because I refused to let his final act of destruction be my burden to carry. Vincent didn't die that night. The police arrived just in time to pull him back from the crumbling edge of the lighthouse. He was hospitalized for severe hypothermia and immediately placed under a mandatory psychiatric hold. The man who had spent 4 years playing a brilliant, untouchable entrepreneur was now locked in a sterile room, facing down a long, dark tunnel of psychological evaluation and impending criminal trials. 2 weeks later, the civil court in Boston handed down its final ruling. The asset freeze was made permanent. The intellectual property transfer to Apex Holdings was legally voided. The patents, my patents, were secured. I had won. But winning a war like this doesn't feel like a victory parade. It just feels like surviving. I drove back to my house, the house we bought when we first started the firm. It was empty now. Vincent's clothes were gone, his books were packed away, his presence systematically scrubbed from the rooms. RA was just a structure again. Walls, floors, ceilings. I walked into his old study. I hadn't been in here since the night I discovered the truth. Sitting in the corner, leaning against the wall, was a large, heavy black drafting tube. I walked over and unscrewed the cap. Inside, carefully rolled and preserved, was a massive sheet of drafting paper. I pulled it out and spread it across his old desk. It was the original blueprint for our very first joint project. A small, conceptual eco-house we had designed when we were still broke, still struggling, still madly in love. We used to spend hours poring over these lines, arguing about the load distribution, laughing about where we would put the impossible spiral staircase. It was the physical manifestation of the dream we thought we were building together. Yeah, I traced my fingers over the faded blue ink. So much hope built into those lines. So much potential. I had held on to this blueprint for years, treating it like a sacred relic of our foundation. But looking at it now, I didn't see a dream. I saw a prison. I saw the very first lie. The lie that if we built something perfect, we would be perfect. You can't live inside a blueprint. You can only live in reality. And my reality was that the man who helped draw these lines had tried to destroy me. I picked up the heavy roll of paper. I carried it out of the study, down the hall, and into the living room. I walked over to the large stone fireplace. I struck a match and lit the kindling. I watched the flames lick up the dry wood, growing stronger, brighter. Then, without hesitating, without shedding a single tear, I tossed the blueprint into the fire. The paper caught instantly. It curled and blackened, the blue lines twisting in the heat before turning into gray ash. I stood there, feeling the warmth of the fire on my face, watching the past burn away. It was a cleansing. It was an eviction. I was burning down the old structure so I could finally clear the land. 4 years of deception. 4 years of waiting. 4 years of being a ghost in my own marriage. It was all turning to smoke, drifting up the chimney and disappearing into the cold Boston night. When the fire finally died down, there was nothing left but embers. And for the first time in a very long time, I took a deep, clean breath. 6 months later, Boston was waking up to spring. The ice had finally melted off the harbor. I was standing in my new office, a sprawling corner suite on the 40th floor overlooking the city. The firm was mine now. Completely, legally, undeniably mine. The board had rallied behind me, the clients had stayed, and the new designs were breaking ground across the East Coast. Harper walked in, holding a tablet and a steaming cup of coffee. She looked at the view, then at me. "Did you see the news?" she asked quietly. I turned around. "I don't follow his trial, Harper. You know that. It's not about Vincent." She tapped the screen and handed the tablet to me. "It's about Maya." I looked down at the headline on a local news blog. It featured a picture of Maya, looking exhausted but smiling, holding a small sleeping infant wrapped in a hospital blanket. The article detailed a miraculous story of a local violinist whose newborn required immediate, multi-million-dollar open-heart surgery, and how an anonymous charitable trust had stepped in at the 11th hour to cover every single cent of the medical bills. The surgery was a success. The baby was going to live. Harper watched me carefully. An anonymous trust, Clara, structured through 3 different offshore accounts to perfectly obscure the donor. I handed the tablet back to her, my expression completely neutral. "The world is full of generous people, Harper. I'm glad the child is okay." She smiled, a small knowing smile, and took a sip of her coffee. "Yes, it is." When people hear about what I did, they usually have one of 2 reactions. They either think I am a monster for destroying my husband with such clinical, calculated precision, or they think I am weak for secretly saving the life of the child he had with his mistress. They don't understand that true power isn't about destruction, and forgiveness isn't about weakness. In those final, frantic hours, when I held Vincent's financial life in my hands, I could have let everything burn. I could have let his lies consume him and everyone attached to him. But that would have meant letting him dictate who I was. It would have meant carrying his darkness with me for the rest of my life. There is a concept in psychology called emotional freedom. It is the understanding that you, and only you, have the power to define your own boundaries. Saving that baby wasn't about forgiving Vincent. I will never forgive him. He will serve his time in a federal penitentiary, and he will carry the weight of his own failures forever. Saving that baby was about me. It was about drawing a hard, the unbreakable line between the sins of the father and the innocence of a child. It was about proving to myself that even after someone tries to demolish your entire world, you still get to choose what kind of structure you rebuild in its place. I turned back to the window. The sun was rising over the harbor, catching the glass of the skyscrapers, turning the city into a brilliant, blinding grid of light and potential. The blueprint of my life had been burned. But that was fine, because I am an architect, and I know how to build from scratch.